All right, so we're going to be talking about the half-angle trig identities with this video here. For this particular problem, we're going to start off by talking about cosine of x over 2. So with the half-angle identities, a couple of things we need to know going into it. First off, there is a formula, whether we're dealing with cosine of x over 2, sine x over 2, tangent x over 2. There is a formula for each one, and each one of them are slightly different. Here we're talking about cosine, so I have the formula for cosine x over 2 here on the board. It is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine x over 2. So for this particular formula, in order to solve this problem here, the main thing is, do we know what cosine of x is? As long as we know what cosine of x is, we can plug it into this part of our formula and just do some algebra here and simplify the rest of it. Now, taking a look at this problem, we are given cosine of x is equal to negative 1 over 11. And we're told that this angle does fall into the third quadrant. But we are given cosine of x, which means we can take cosine of x equal to negative 1 over 11, plug it into our formula appropriately here where it goes, and do a little bit of simplifying in order to wrap up the problem. So since we're already given cosine, we can plug this directly into our formula. So I'm just going to bring this over, plus or minus the square root of 1 plus. Instead of cosine of x, I have negative 1 over 11. And this is all divided by 2. So in our numerator, we need to do a little bit of simplifying first. We need to add these two numbers together, 1 plus the negative 1 over 11. Just to make this adding a little bit easier, remember the number 1 is just 1 over 1, or 2 over 2, 3 over 3, 4 over 4. They all represent the number 1. So off over here to the side, I'm going to say that 1 is equal to 11 over 11. Right, 11 divided by 11 is 1. I'm going to write it as an 11 because I need to add it to this negative 1 over 11. And we can only add or subtract fractions if we have common denominators. 11 plus negative 1 is a 10 over that common denominator of an 11. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that back in over here. And our numerator, 1 plus negative 1 over 11 is 10 over 11. And then we need to divide that by 2. So I'm going to write this out. We have 10 over 11, and we are dividing that by 2. I'm writing it out horizontally because in my mind that makes the division a little bit easier to do. So we have our numerator divided by our denominator is what I have written here. You do need to remember the division rule for fractions, or a lot of times calculators can do this for you. Depending on your teacher, you may or may not be allowed to use a calculator, so it's always good to know this by hand. The rule for dividing fractions says the first fraction stays the same, change division to multiplication, and flip the second one. So if we multiply this out, 10 times 1 is 10, over 11 times 2 is 22. So this equals the square root of 10 over 22. Now we can simplify that, and actually let me go ahead and simplify that before I plug that in. I'm not sure why I didn't already do so. 10 over 22 can be simplified. We can divide out of 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 22 divided by 2 is 11. So we actually get 5 over 11 as our simplified fraction. All we have to do is continue simplifying this. Remember, a radical is not considered simplified unless if there's a radical in the denominator. And remember that the square root of 5 over 11 is the same thing as the square root of 5 over the square root of 11. So this is not considered simplified. So let me go ahead and bring that down over here. The only thing we have to do to wrap this problem up, we're essentially done. We just need to simplify this out. We need to get rid of the radical that's in the denominator, and we do that by multiplying by that radical that's in the denominator. This is called rationalizing the denominator. So we multiply top and bottom by the square root of 11, which in the numerator, square root of 5 times square root of 11. Again, just multiply those two numbers together. 5 times 11 is 55. And square root of 11 times square root of 11 is 11. So this actually wraps up this problem. We're going to talk about an example with sine of x over 2. I have that formula on the board. It looks very, very similar to the cosine x over 2. There's one slight difference, so do not get these formulas confused. The cosine x over 2 pretty much looks the same, except it has 1 plus cosine of x. For the sine of x over 2, it's the square root of 1 minus cosine of x over 2. So it can be kind of tricky there. They look very, very similar, so do double check your formulas to make sure you are using the appropriate one. So in order to plug into this formula, the main thing we need to be aware of is, do we know what cosine of x is? As long as we know what that is, we can plug that into the formula. Even a lot of times calculators will simplify. You can type in all of this together and it'll simplify and give you the answer. But again, you may or may not be allowed to use the calculator, so knowing how to do this by hand is really going to help you out. So taking a look at this problem, we are given sine of x is equal to 2 square roots of 10 over 7. We need cosine of x. So we are going to have to do a little finagling here in order to figure out what cosine of x is equal to. So we are given that sine of x is equal to 2 square roots of 10 over 7. Remember that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that means that 2 square roots of 10 goes here since it is opposite our angle, and that means the 7 is the hypotenuse, so it goes there. So that means we need to figure out what this missing side over here is because we need cosine, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that means in order to find the missing side of a right triangle, we use Pythagoras Theorem. So Pythagoras Theorem, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. I'm going to say that a is the 2 square roots of 10. We are solving for b squared, and we know that c squared is 7. So that means we need to square 2 square roots of 10. So that means we have 2 square roots of 10 times 2 square roots of 10. Again, remember, do number times number, radical times radical. So number times number, 2 times 2 gives us 4. Radical times radical, square root of 10 times square root of 10 is 10. And 4 times 10 is equal to 40. So here we have 40, drop down to b squared, 7 squared, 7 times 7 is 49. Subtract that 40 from both sides, and we get that b squared is equal to 9. And if we take the square root of both sides, we get that b is equal to 3. That is the square root of 9. So we actually get a nice, pretty number for this one. So what that tells us then is we now know that cosine of x, remember cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so cosine would then be 3 over 7. So now that we know what cosine is, we can plug that in directly into our formula, and we can simplify and find the rest. So our formula says the plus or minus square root of, in the numerator, 1 minus cosine x, which is 3/7 over 2. In the numerator, to do the 1 minus 3/7, I'm going to write 1 as 7 over 7, and we are subtracting 3 over 7 from it. So that's going to give us 4/7. So I'm going to plug that in back over here. So our numerator, 1 minus 3/7, is 4/7, and we're going to divide that by 2. I like to do my division side by side. And what I mean by that, we are doing 4/7 divided by, remember this fraction bar just means division, and we're dividing that by 2, which is just 2 over 1. Remember, division is just another way of multiplying. Keep the first. Oh, sorry, let me rewrite that. Keep the first, multiply, and then flip the second. So that means here when we multiply across, we get 4 over 14. So let's see, plus or minus the square root of 4 over 14. So we just need to do a little bit of simplifying here. Remember that 4 over 14 is the same thing as the square root of 4 over the square root of 14. That's what that means. So all we need to do is rationalize the denominator by multiplying numerator and denominator by the square root of 14. So let's see. In the numerator, the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 14, we're just going to bring down, over square root of 14 times 14 is just a 14. The only thing left to simplify here is we can't simplify our radical anymore, but this 2 over 14 can be simplified because they do reduce by a power of 2. So 2 divided by 2 cancels to a 1. 14 divided by 2 is a 7, so I am running out of room here, so I'm going to put my answer right here. In the numerator, all we have left is the square root of 14. And the denominator, we had 14, but remember we're dividing that by 2, so we get a 7. So we get the square root of 14 over 7 as our final answer there. Otherwise, that's it for this video.